Okay, so this is about complex numbers. What is a complex number? I. And I is defined as the square root of -1. I'm having a hard time writing on the board. Hold on just a moment here. I need to see if I need to pull those up to make my writing work. Yes, yay. Okay, so square root of -1. There's all kinds of strange things that come from this, though. Like, it's not just that I can now do the square root of -25. That is handy, but there's a lot more that comes from this. All right. So instead of just real numbers, we also have imaginary. That's kind of like opposites, you know, like light and day, real and imaginary. There's real numbers, there's imaginary numbers. What do you think you get if you have a number that's part real and part imaginary? It's complex. That's a complex number. So every number is actually part real and part imaginary. Even the number 2. I think it'd actually be fun to go back and show elementary teachers who have taught their whole life, you know, how to like add simple numbers like 2 plus 3, that this actually is considered 2 plus 0i, because its imaginary part is 0. And they'd be like, what are you even talking about? That's what you're going to know by the end of the hour. Get your real part, get your imaginary part. All right, we're obviously focusing on the imaginary part of a complex number, and that's the part that has I. So let me go back to the beginning here. Square root of -25 is really, who said it before? It's 5i. Where's it come from? Well, it's because it's the square root of 25 times the square root of -1. Do you remember that whole square root of -1 is I? That's just a definition. Then this is 5, and this is I. That's why the answer is 5i. Now, I know this part right here is confusing, but mathematicians just had to make up something for it that would be easier to write, carry around, than the square root of -1. And so they said, hey, let's just let the square root of -1 be called I. And then wherever you would have written the square root of -1, we could just write an I. That way you can have things like, you know, 25i squared even in an answer. Except today I'm going to teach you how to figure out what I squared is equal to, or I to the second, sorry, I to the third, or I to the fourth, or I to the fifth, I to any power. You can figure out what it's equal to. All right, so one little thing at a time. Here's another place where you're going to see this. 5 plus and minus the square root of 25 all over 10. That would be a pretty easy one. You saw it on the top 20. You remember that? Actually, first 20 was on there too. You know what I'm talking about? All right, this one's actually really simple because this part's just equal to what? 5. All right, how about if I said square root of 50? Write that one down. Solve it. Most of you have got this down by now. Then what's going to make it more complicated in a moment is we'll start dealing with square roots of negatives. I'm going to pause for a second while you give this one a try. Okay. Row 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th person. 1 plus or minus square root of 2 over 2. Raise your hand if you got the same thing. Ooh, a lot of you did. Awesome. If you didn't, let me explain quick. That's square root of 25 and the square root of what? 2. And then that's 5 root 2. If you didn't get that part, then you wouldn't be able to proceed. But if you get that part, then you also need to know that 5 can be factored out of both of those. And therefore you have 5 comes out 1 plus and minus root 2. And that was the hardest part that I just did there. Everybody can factor 10 into 5 times 2. So that factoring thing is the part that gets people. Now, I don't want to review it because based on you guys raising your hands, a ton of you got this right off the bat, which is awesome. So now we just have to include one more little thing. What if there was an I? Let me go back to this one. Here's my answer. If there had been an I, the I would be placed right there. Okay, so try this one. 6 plus and minus the square root of negative, let me think, 27 all over 9. And hint, there's an I in your answer. I'm going to pause for a second while you give that one a try. Here's where I think I'm going to have the most trouble. I think most people will get that it's got a 3, and they might get confused for sure what to do after that. It's 3, and then the I, and then the square root of 3. Do you get what I just did there? This is the I part. This is the 3 part. And I rearranged them. 3I root 3. Okay? So this is gone now. And I've got 3I root 3. And now, if you can factor it, you should. And this part right here has a 3 in both parts. And what do you have left? 2 plus minus I root 3. All over 9, which is really 3 times 3. And that makes this cancel. There's your final answer. 2 plus and minus I root 3 all over 3. That's one of the hardest things. And you know why it doesn't feel that hard? Because we've been doing the top 20 long enough. The first 20 long enough. And the first 20 had ones that were kind of like this. And so this kind of hopefully feels pretty easy. But that's one of the hardest things on the test. When's the test again? Friday. So just 5 little short days from now. 2 more days of new stuff, 1 day of review, and then the test. That's one of the things you have to know right there. All right. What else do we have to know? You have to understand how to handle me saying, hey, I have I to the 5th. What's that really equal to? Well, if I said I had 2 to the 5th, it would mean 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and it would be, anybody do that in your head quick? What is it? 32. 32. Just keep multiplying 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. All right. So what if it's I to the 5th? Well, that takes a little more thought. It really is this simple. It's I times I times I times I times I, but that doesn't really help very much. But what if I could make it into sets of I squared? That doesn't feel like it helps very much either, does it? I mean, but what if you knew what I squared was? What if I squared was a number? Because it is. I want you to work with the kid next to you and try to figure out what the heck you think I squared is. I'm telling you, it's a number. And it's not 2. What do you think I squared would be? I'm going to pause while you figure that out. Okay. Do I have any theories? What do you think I squared is? Yes. -1. Who's got it? Anybody else agree or disagree? I want to join the -1 train? Raise your hand if you think it is -1. A lot of people. All right. Well, let's talk about it just briefly, and I think you'll understand this. If I had said square root of 7 times the square root of 7, would you agree that's the square root of 49, which is 7? Did anybody use that logic to like figure out what it was? Because what if I had the square root of 2.1 and the square root of 2.1? What do you think the answer to that is? 2.1. So then what if you have the square root of -1 times the square root of -1, which is what I squared means? You see what I mean? And it must be -1. All right, so if you could remember nothing else from this whole hour, honestly, I would want it to be that I squared is -1. Because that's the one that comes up on the ACT all the time. Here's a typical answer on the ACT. except that would be the wrong answer. What would the right answer be? Simplify that down from what I just told you, what you just figured out. Now, if the ACT had asked for you for the answer in simplest form, that wouldn't have been it. Because you could have simplified the I squared into what? -1. What's I squared? -1. And then if that's -1, then yeah, the whole thing adds up to 0. Raise your hand if you had 0 holding on in your head there. Good. Okay, so since I squared is -1, do you get, here, I'll make it simpler. I'll make this plus. Would you please multiply that out, and there'll be an I squared in it? Make sure that at the end you deal with the I squared. You can't just leave it there. Sounds kind of ruthless, doesn't it? Deal with it. So let's hopefully have this thing multiplied out. 3 times 2 makes 6. 3 times I. Do you do it that way? Because not everybody does. Some of you guys do it first, outside, inside, last. That's the way I learned it. Raise your hand if you're a FOIL person. First, outside, inside, last. Okay. Raise your hand if you're a multiply them out like I'm just doing it right now person. It's about half and half. So I'm surprised by that because mostly I think of it, oh, everybody knows FOIL. A lot of people do it this way, just so you know. And it's an okay way. All right, now I'm going to do the I times the 2, and that makes 2I. And then I'm going to do the I times the I, and that makes the big special one, I squared, which you know is really what? -1. So if that's really -1, it can go with the 6 and make what? 5. Plus, those guys go together, 5I. Technically, you're supposed to have the 5I part last because it's the complicated, the complex. That's the thing that makes it a complex number. The imaginary part is supposed to be listed second. Raise your hand if you had that one right. Awesome. All right, now, one more thing. Remember how I just made a big deal about I squared being -1? Go back to this question. Why do you think I broke this up into a couple of I squareds and an I? Because the I squareds change into -1s. And then that simplifies down to equal what? That makes +1, I, which is just what? I. And I know it's weird, but I to the 5th equals I. What? You put something in the 5th power and it doesn't change? Give me another example, something else that does that. Yes. 1. You take the number 1, you put it to the 8th power, it's still 1. But the weird thing about this is I squared. First, if you start with I is, of course, equal to I. I squared, we just said a second ago, is equal to what? -1. What's I to the 3rd? It's something else. What's I to the 4th? It's something else. And then I to the 5th recycles back to I again. And it starts the pattern over again. So let's just fill in the 2 that we don't know. What's I to the 3rd? Because it's I squared times I. You get how that's -1? And that's why it was -I. What's I to the 4th? Isn't it really I squared times I squared? So it would be 1. So those of you that like nice, clean lists to know when Mr. Server asks you what's I to the 7th, the bad thing is you're going to think that you're just supposed to memorize this. I to the 1st, I to the 2nd, I to the 3rd, I to the 4th, I to the 5th. You're not supposed to memorize that. Because I'm not going to just pick one of those. I'm going to pick, like, what's I to the 8th? Do you get it's a bunch of I squareds? Figure out what the answer is based on knowing that. I'm going to pause for a second while you figure that one out. What is I to the 8th? The answer proposed is 1. -1, -1, And then isn't there a couple more negative ones? There's 4 negative ones all multiplied, and that equals 1. It's 1. How about this? It's I squared to the what power? I squared times I squared times I squared times I squared is I squared to the 4th. Do you get that's the same thing then as negative 1 to the 4th, which would then be 1. Okay. There, you learned everything. And great news, in a few minutes, you're going to be able to practice this on the top 20, right here, right now. So take a couple minutes to clear your brain, and we're taking the top 20, because in the top 20, we have problems just like that, and hopefully you're going to rock that question. That's all I got for your homework for today. It's a Schoology quiz. Remember, the Schoology quizzes are set to 2 tries, and if you get a 75% or better, I give you full credit, 10 out of 10 on your homework. If you get 75% or better, average on your 2 Schoology quizzes. All right, that's all I got for you for today. The rest of the hour is taking a top 20.